I'm not sure how you begin with an audience in the Netherlands. In America, you begin with a joke. In Asia, you begin with an apology. So I guess in Europe, I combine the two traditions. And I'll apologize for my bad joke. But my bad joke actually is a true story. You know, I used to be at one point in time permanent secretary of the foreign ministry in Singapore. And when I was the permanent secretary, one of my colleagues, another permanent secretary, happened to visit China. And in China, he called on his counterpart, a vice minister in China. So he arrived at the office and he said, "Oh, I am Mr. Tan. I'm the permanent secretary from this ministry in Singapore." And there was a young Chinese lady translator there. She listened to him in English and she was scratching her head, trying to figure out how to translate it to Chinese. And then she finally said in Chinese, she said, "Well, this guy says he's Mr. Tan, and he says that he's the eternal typist from Singapore." So permanent secretary became eternal typist. Now, the reason why I begin with that story is that it shows that if you can have cultural misunderstanding between Singapore, which is 75% Chinese, and China, which is 100% Chinese, that you do have a challenge in our hand. And that challenge is going to get even bigger because we are going to enter into a completely different world from the one that we've experienced in the last 200 years. And that essentially is what I'm going to be speaking about. Now if I had to divide my remarks, I would say I would divide them into three parts. The first part, of course, is the good news. The second part, I guess I have to share with you some bad news. And then to make sure you all go home happy, I'll have a happy ending at the end of my remarks. But let me begin with the good news. And the good news actually, to be candid with you, is very, very good news. And I say this because, I spend a lot of time reading Western publications and listening to what Western leaders say. And time after time, in almost every Western leader's speech, whether it's George W. Bush, or the Canadian Prime Minister, or some European leader, there's a favorite line that they like to use. And the favorite line goes something like this: "We live in a dangerous world, and it's becoming ever more dangerous." Well, my good news is that we are not living in a dangerous world, and it is going to become far less dangerous. And that's an amazing thing to absorb. Because I have to emphasize this because at the same time, even after spending 2 days here in Netherlands, I can sense in the Netherlands a certain degree of foreboding, a certain degree of fear about the future. It's real. And I've experienced it elsewhere too. And to some extent, this sense of foreboding is natural because we are going to enter a different era. And how would I define the new era? I define it with two major points. The first major point, of course, is that we are reaching the end of the era of Western domination of world history. But I hasten to add, by the way, that the end of the era of Western domination of world history is not the end of the West. The West remains the single strongest civilization for a long, long time. You don't have to feel any sense of danger that you're going to disappear or decline. But what's different is that we're going to go mono-civilizational world to a multi-civilizational world. And this, of course, brings me to my second point, which is that you're going to see the return of Asia. And the reason why I call it the return of Asia is because from the year 1 to the year 1820, for 18 centuries, the two largest economies of the world were consistently China and India. And what we're going to see in this century is that by 2050, as the Goldman Sachs projection points out, the four largest economies in the world then will be number 1, China, number 2, India, number 3, United States, number 4, Japan. So 3 out of the 4 largest economies of the world will be Asia. And it's important to emphasize that this is a return to the norm. And because this is a return to the norm, it is likely to happen. But what is even more amazing is the speed at which this is happening. And frankly, even I myself wasn't quite aware how fast this change was going to happen until when I finished my book. I sent to various people. I said, please give me a blurb, please give me an endorsement, I'm going to sell the book. So I sent the book to Larry Summers, the former Treasury Secretary, the former President of Harvard. He gave me a wonderful endorsement, which you'll find on the back of the English edition. Then he sent me an additional paragraph, which is so powerful that I decided I had to put it into the book, even though I'd finished it. So in the last paragraph of my introduction, I put his paragraph in. And he said, basically, what's happening in Asia today is essentially a replication of what the West experienced in the Industrial Revolution. But he said in the Western Industrial Revolution, when you had an improvement in living standards, you had an improvement in living standards of about 50% in one lifetime. He said the same thing is happening in Asia, but there you don't have an improvement of 50% or 100% or 200%, but it's 10,000%. Believe me, I was very skeptical when I saw that figure. But fortunately, by sheer luck, I happened to be on a panel with the former president of World Bank, Jim Wolfenson. And before the panel discussion began, I told Jim, I said, listen, I've got this amazing statistic from Larry Summers, who says that you're going to have a 10,000% improvement in one lifetime in Asia. He said, yeah, Kishore, Larry sent that to me too. I said, what do you do? He said, I've got my research assistants to check. So he got his research assistants to check, and guess what? They discovered that the figure is correct. Now, once you hoist in that figure, you begin to realize we are going to experience a change that is completely unprecedented in human history. And that's why it is quite natural to feel a sense of foreboding, because there's a whole new world that is emerging. But of course the big question is, and I ask this as an Asian, is why is it happening now? Why didn't it happen 100 years ago? Why didn't it happen 50 years ago? Why now? And this is, so my answer in the book, and I'm glad Mikhail mentioned it, is that the Asians have finally, as I say, understood, absorbed, and implemented 7 pillars of Western wisdom. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about these 7 pillars, because, you know, when the Economist reviewed my book, they said, oh, don't bother reading this book. This is just another anti-Western polemic, you know. And I said, how can a book that says that Asia is rising because of 7 pillars of Western wisdom be described as an anti-Western